My name is Isabella Reed. I'm 66 years old, retired for nearly 2 years now, living alone in a quiet corner of Delaware. I get by on a modest $2,500 monthly pension, just enough if I keep an eye on every dollar. Life is simple, quiet, predictable, and most days, that's enough. Have you ever felt like you were being pushed aside or left out? Tell us what you think, and feel free to share your own story with us in the comments. Since my husband passed away nearly 3 decades ago, it's been just me and my son, Liam. I raised him on my own, working shifts at a textile mill, picking up weekend gigs, doing whatever it took to keep the lights on and food on the table. I poured everything I had into giving him a better life. And when he graduated college, landed a stable job, and married, I felt a pride so deep it made all the sleepless nights worth it. Still, nothing prepares you for the quiet that follows. The holidays, especially, have a way of tugging at old memories. The smell of cinnamon, the twinkle of lights, the sound of wind against old windows, they remind you of the years when the house was full of noise, of laughter, of life. So when Liam called in early December and said, "Mom, why don't you come spend Christmas with us this year?" my heart swelled in a way it hadn't in a long, long time. I could almost hear sleigh bells in the background. The moment we hung up, I was already halfway to the closet. I pulled out my old suitcase, gave it a good wipe, and began packing like I was going on the most important journey of my life. I folded my holiday sweater, tucked in a jar of homemade cranberry jam, and even baked Liam's favorite pecan shortbread cookies, just like I used to when he was little. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. Hope had returned, soft and glowing like a candle in winter. I didn't know then that the warmth I felt would be short-lived. But for that moment, I allowed myself to believe that family still meant something. When I arrived at Liam's apartment, the elevator doors slid open, and there stood Sabrina, my daughter-in-law, already waiting. "Isabella, you're finally here. It's freezing outside. Come on in," she beamed, taking my suitcase with bright, cheerful energy. Her hospitality was effortless, her smile flawless. She whisked me inside like a treasured guest. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and roast beef. Twinkling lights lined the mantel. The tree stood tall, glittering in the corner. It was, by every measure, a picture-perfect holiday. Liam peeked his head out of the study. "Hey, Mom," he said with a tired smile. "Work's been insane. Glad you made it." His voice was rushed, distracted, but I told myself he was just exhausted. That was all. Sabrina returned quickly with a cup of steaming tea. "Sit, relax, dinner will be ready soon," she said, bustling away with practiced ease. That night's meal was rich and beautiful: roasted chicken with rosemary, creamy mashed potatoes, candied carrots, warm bread. Everyone chatted, laughed, passed dishes around. Yet as I sat at the table, something in my chest felt still and heavy. Sabrina never once asked how I'd been. Liam barely looked up from his phone, and when they shared memories or cracked jokes, I realized I wasn't part of any of them. There was no, "Remember when, Mom?" No, "Isabella, you should tell them that story." Not even a glance to check if I needed more water. I smiled through it all, answering when spoken to, laughing politely at the right moments. But I felt like a replaced at the table, not truly welcome to it. The chair was mine, yes, but the space? It belonged to them. I stared at the glowing centerpiece, the reflection of the flames dancing on polished silverware, and thought this was not what I had imagined. This was not the warmth I had packed my holiday sweater for. Sometimes, the deepest cold is hidden beneath the prettiest lights, and no matter how sweet the invitation, some rooms still find a way to remind you that you don't belong. Later that week, long after the dishes were washed and the laughter had faded from the living room, I retreated early to the guest room. I wasn't tired, but something about the forced cheer of the house made me feel small, like I was shrinking into silence. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, watching the gray winter sky through the window. Then, needing air, I stepped quietly into the hallway. That's when I heard them. 2 voices, low, hushed, but clear enough to slice through the quiet. Sabrina and her mother, Cynthia, were speaking in the kitchen, unaware that their words drifted straight down the hallway. "She's still moving around now, but what happens when she gets sick?" Sabrina said sharply. I'm supposed to drop everything and take care of her? She's not our responsibility, Cynthia replied, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. And that little pension of hers? It barely covers her groceries. If she's going to be living much longer, you need to protect your future. My breath caught. She has that house, Sabrina said, lowering her voice. It's old, but the location's good. We could get 3, maybe 400 grand for it. Exactly, Cynthia whispered. Get her to sign it over. While she's still clear-headed, make it look like you're just helping with paperwork. If you wait too long, someone else could end up with it. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, the heat rushing to my ears, my body turning cold. Me, the woman who had worked night shifts to raise their precious Liam. The woman who had saved every penny to help him through college. Now reduced to a burden. A liability. A financial calculation whispered behind my back. I backed away from the hallway like a ghost, heart pounding, chest hollow. They hadn't seen me, but I had seen them, heard them. And in that moment, a part of me shattered. Not because of the betrayal, but because I had walked into this home thinking I still mattered. Turns out, to them, I was just a number on a checkbook, a name on a deed. And they were planning to erase me from both. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, not even because I was heartbroken, but because something inside me, something old and weary, had finally woken up. It was dignity, stirring from years of silence. At 2:17 a.m., I sat up in bed and began to pack. Slowly, carefully. The new wool coat I'd bought for this trip, the homemade bacon rolls I had prepared with love, the jar of apricot jam wrapped in tissue paper, each item folded away like the closing lines of a story I hadn't meant to finish this soon. I moved like a ghost, my slippers barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. I scribbled a quick note on a notepad I found on the nightstand. Neighbor Helen had an emergency. I went to help. Don't worry. The handwriting was shaky, crooked, a mirror of the storm swirling inside me. I left it neatly on the edge of the guest bed, like a farewell letter no one would ever truly read. Then I opened the front door. The night air slapped me awake sharp, cold, and biting. But it was still gentler than the words I had heard earlier. I clutched my suitcase tighter and stepped out into the darkness, one slow breath at a time. No one stirred behind me. No one called after me. And that was the loudest silence of all. As I walked through the snow-lined streets, the only sound was the soft crunch beneath my boots and the wind whistling through bare branches. The streetlights flickered like distant stars, indifferent to the ache in my chest. When I reached my front door, the familiar creak of the hinges felt like an embrace. I stepped inside, turned on no lights, and let the warmth of my tiny home wrap itself around me like a blanket. Then, at last, I sat on the sofa, placed my suitcase gently by the door, and allowed the tears to come hot, silent, and long overdue. This wasn't just a departure. It was a quiet reclamation. I had walked away from their table, but I had returned to my own. The radiator hummed softly. The scent of lavender still lingered faintly in the hallway. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, it was calm, safe. I wandered through the rooms slowly, like I was reacquainting myself with a part of me I'd long forgotten. Dust floated lazily in the morning light. My fingers traced the edge of a photo frame, the smile of a younger me staring back. Somewhere in the back of the closet, beneath a stack of old scarves and unused linens, I found a worn red folder. Inside was a yellowed envelope, and when I opened it, a faded membership card slipped into my hand. Delaware Community Photography Club. My name is printed in gold letters, slightly worn but still legible. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned by the weight of that little piece of cardstock. Years ago, decades, really, I had loved photography. Back when life still held space for joy, I remembered saving for months to buy my first second-hand camera, lugging it everywhere like a secret treasure. I had captured sunrises over farm fields, children playing in puddles, my son Liam blowing out birthday candles with icing on his nose. But over time, bills piled up. Shifts became longer. Joy was traded for survival. The camera disappeared into a drawer, buried under life's demands. Now, staring at that card, something stirred inside me. Why not? Why not take one small step back toward the woman I used to be? That very afternoon, I walked into the local community college. The admissions office was small, the woman behind the desk kind. She smiled as I fumbled with my purse, nerves fluttering like moths in my chest. "I'd like to enroll," I said quietly. "Photography, beginner's course." With a few signatures and a printed schedule, it was done. As I stepped back out into the chilly afternoon, student ID in hand, I felt something shift. Not everything lost stays buried forever. Some dreams just wait quietly, patiently for the day we're finally ready to live for ourselves. 6. I didn't expect to fall in love with life again. But that's exactly what happened, one shutter click at a time. The photography class turned out to be more than just lessons on aperture and composition. It was a doorway, a second chance. My classmates were mostly retirees like me, each carrying their own story of loss, rediscovery, and quiet hope. We laughed often, shared coffee between classes, swapped stories about grandchildren, aches and pains, and dreams that refused to die. Soon, a few of us formed a little group and named it the Golden Lens Kluba, nod to our silver hair and golden years. There was Martha, who once worked as a librarian and now had an eye for architectural shadows. Tom, a retired postman, who captured breathtaking images of birds mid-flight. And Emily, soft-spoken but vibrant, who saw color where the rest of us saw gray. We went on photo walks every week, end-old cameras slung around our necks, eyes wide open to a world we'd once rushed past. One of my photos, sunset on Walnut Street, a quiet moment of a man sipping tea on his porch, was submitted to a local exhibition. To my amazement, it won second place. When the local newspaper published a small article about it, I sat in my living room holding the paper with trembling hands. There it was, my name, my photo, my story. For the first time in years, I felt seen. After that, things moved fast. I opened a simple online shop to sell prints. People reached out, some wanted art for their cafes, others for gifts or gallery walls. The income wasn't huge, but the pride? That was priceless. No longer was I just Jason's mother or the quiet old lady on Elm Street. I was Isabella Walker, photographer. My days are filled with purpose. Editing, learning, creating. I'd found something I thought I had lost forever, not just a hobby, but myself. Life wasn't over. In fact, it was finally beginning, and I had the lens to prove it. After the newspaper article was published and my small photography studio started gaining traction, the silence from my son's household was suddenly replaced by a flurry of phone calls and sugary messages. Sabrina called first. Her voice, once clipped and dismissive, now flowed with honeyed concern. "Isabella, I saw your photo in the paper. What an achievement. You've always been so talented. We really should catch up. Maybe lunch next week?" I thanked her politely, but kept my tone distant. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit from Cynthia. She arrived with a basket of imported fruit, compliments tumbling from her lips like confetti. "You're simply glowing, dear. This photography thing suits you. I heard from Sabrina that your online shop is doing quite well. And now with the studio too? Incredible." I smiled. "Thank you. It's kept me busy." Then, as expected, came the real reason. Cynthia leaned forward, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "My son Sabrina's brother, he's launching an innovative startup, tremendous potential. Just a bit of seed money, and I thought, well, with your eye for investments." Her words trailed off, hanging in the air like perfume that quickly turned sour. I set down my teacup carefully and met her gaze. "Oh, I'm flattered. But I've actually reinvested all of my savings into the photography studio," I said warmly, almost cheerfully. "New equipment, gallery space, a few travel plans, it's all accounted for." Cynthia blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected a door closed so gently, yet firmly. "I see," she said, her smile thinning at the edges. "Yes, I replied, with the ease of someone who no longer owed explanations. Everything's spoken for. They came with baskets and compliments, hoping to pick from a tree they once tried to cut down. But I had already replanted myself firmly and far from their reach. Some doors, once shut, stay closed. And I had never felt more at peace. It started with a misplaced receipt. I had just returned from the grocery store when I noticed something odd. My bank statements were no longer where I had left them. A folder slightly out of place. A drawer not fully shut. And then I saw her. Sabrina, standing at my desk, flipping through my documents with the focus of someone searching for buried treasure. When she heard my footsteps, she straightened quickly, flashing that overly bright smile. "Oh, Isabella, I was just admiring your photography awards. So impressive." I said nothing. I simply nodded, calm on the surface, but inside, something hardened. That night, I changed every password, double-checked every lock, and opened the small safe I had installed months earlier just in case. Then I made a call. "Mr. Carson," I said to my lawyer, "it's time." Within days, I had installed discreet cameras and kept a recorder tucked in my purse, just waiting. It didn't take long. On a quiet afternoon in their living room, I captured it all, Sabrina and Cynthia, whispering over tea, plotting how to have me sign over the deed to my house. "She's getting older. A few sweet words, a little guilt, and we'll have her wrapped around our fingers," Sabrina said. Cynthia laughed. "Just make sure she doesn't wise up before the papers are signed." They didn't know I was listening. A week later, I invited them over for a family reconciliation dinner. They arrived smiling, gracious, already rehearsing their kindness. We sat around the table, small talk, polite laughter. Then I pulled out the small black recorder, placed it gently on the table, and pressed play. The room turned to ice. Their voices filled the air, every word, every plan, every insult. Sabrina's face drained of color. Cynthia clutched her wine glass like a lifeline. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "Now we know where we stand." Because sometimes, the loudest declaration of power is silence backed by proof. And I had both. Liam showed up 2 days later. No appointment, no call. Just a soft knock at my door, and a man standing on the porch, rumpled, tear-streaked, and no longer carrying the air of someone entitled to forgiveness. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "I don't even know where to start." I stood still, searching his eyes, looking for the boy I had once cradled after nightmares, the young man I had believed in through every hardship. Somewhere beneath the weight of shame and regret, he was still there. "I ended it with Sabrina," he said, stepping into the living room like someone entering a church slowly, reverently. "I should have seen it earlier, what she became, what I became." I said nothing. He sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders hunched. "What we did to you, what I allowed to happen, there's no excuse. I wanted to be successful, to give my family more, and somewhere along the way, I forgot the woman who gave up everything for me." His voice broke completely. "You didn't deserve any of it, Mom. Not the lies, not the manipulation, and definitely not the silence." A long pause settled between us. Then, quietly, I sat across from him. "Liam," I said gently, "I've waited years to hear those words, but I also spent years hoping for a version of you that no longer saw me as a stepping stone. I'm not asking to go back," he said quickly. "I just want to rebuild, to start again." My eyes softened. "I believe your apology is real. I believe you've changed, but I've also changed." I reached for his hand, held it for a moment, warm, familiar, but no longer an extension of my identity. "I forgive you," I whispered, "but I can't go back. Not to being the mother who's only seen when convenient." Tears welled in his eyes, but this time, he didn't beg. He didn't argue. He nodded slow, understanding, respectful. And in that quiet moment, a chapter closed, not in bitterness, but in grace. Isabella's story didn't end in quiet retirement. It bloomed like a wild sunflower breaking through concrete. With her Golden Lens group, she traveled across the country photographing desert sunrises in Arizona, the bustling charm of New Orleans, the misty woods of Oregon. Her camera, once tucked away in a drawer for decades, had become an extension of her spirit. Each photo captured more than light. It captured life. Her work appeared in galleries, community centers, and even a feature in a national photography magazine titled Second Act: Stories Behind the Lens. At one exhibition in San Francisco, someone asked, "Are you a professional?" She smiled. "No. I'm just someone who finally gave herself permission to live." She wasn't a background character anymore. She wasn't mom, only called upon in crisis. She was Isabella Walker, artist, traveler, and woman of her own making. The house that once echoed with silence now thrummed with joy. Her studio wall was lined with framed prints, each one a piece of her journey, her healing, her voice. Young photographers reached out, asking for advice. Retirees wrote to her, saying, "You reminded me it's not too late." Her story became something more than personal. It became a quiet revolution. She no longer waited for calls that never came. She no longer shrank in anyone's shadow. Some evenings, she'd sit by the window, warm tea in hand, watching the sunset pour gold across her garden. No sadness, no longing, just peace. Jason visited, sometimes always respectful, always with a soft smile that said, "I understand now." And that was enough. There were no more performances, no more pretending. Only truth, only freedom. And when Isabella zipped up her camera bag for the next journey, this time to photograph the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., she paused at the doorway, breathing in the scent of lavender from her garden. Her eyes sparkled, not with nostalgia, but with anticipation. Because this wasn't an ending. It was a woman, fully herself, finally writing her own final chapters, bold, bright, and utterly hers.